Sometimes you get a case that isn't about a single explosive problem. It's about a silent sickness that's been festering in a family for years, and the so-called problem is just the fever breaking. It's the symptom, not the disease. The file comes across my desk, and the headline is designed to make you judge, to make you dismiss it immediately. A two-year-old girl fakes her own disappearance. You read that and you think attention seeker, drama queen, narcissist. The world is quick to slap a label on a behavior they don't understand because it's easier than doing the hard work of asking why. My job isn't to read the label on the bottle, it's to analyze the ingredients. And with this young woman, let's call her Jenna, I knew the ingredients were going to be a whole lot more complex and a whole lot more tragic than the label suggested. When she first walked onto my stage, you could feel the judgment from everyone. The audience, the crew, even her own family sitting beside her. Her parents, Mark and Susan, were a portrait of exhausted frustration. They weren't monsters, you have to understand that. They were just two people at the absolute end of their rope. Their body language screamed it. Mark sat stiff as a board, arms crossed, a permanent frown etched into his face. Susan was a bundle of nervous energy wringing her hands, her eyes darting between me and her daughter, a look of pleading and anger all mixed up. And then there was Jenna. She was trying so hard to look strong, defiant even, but I've been doing this for a long time. I can see the cracks in the armor. I saw a terrified young girl hunched in on herself as if to make herself a smaller target. The world had already convicted her, and her family was leading the prosecution. Their story, the one they told my producers and the one they started to tell me, was simple. Jenna had always been dramatic. She exaggerated illnesses as a child. She told tall tales in high school, and now this was the ultimate escalation. One Tuesday, she just vanished, left her car at a local park, her phone and wallet inside. A note was found that was just vague enough to be terrifying. For 48 hours, they lived a parent's worst nightmare. Police were involved, search parties were organized, the local news picked it up. They were drowning in fear and grief. And then a call came from a motel 2 states away. It was Jenna. She was fine. She had taken a bus. The whole thing was, in their words, a hoax, a stunt, a selfish, cruel cry for attention. And you know what? On the surface, they had every right to be angry. The betrayal, the wasted resources, the emotional terrorism she had inflicted upon them, it's a powerful argument. But I don't deal in surfaces. I deal in what's underneath. My first question to them wasn't about the disappearance. It was simpler. I looked at Mark and Susan and I said, tell me about Jenna as a little girl. Before all this, what was she like? Susan teared up almost immediately. She talked about a sweet, quiet child who loved to draw. Mark, however, was more clinical. He said she was always sensitive, too sensitive. That was the first red flag for me. When a parent labels a child's natural emotional state as too much, it tells me that the child learned very early on that their authentic feelings were an inconvenience. They learned to either suppress those feelings or, if they're desperate to be heard, to amplify them to a level that can't be ignored. I turned to Jenna. I didn't ask her if she faked it. I knew she did. The facts were clear. I asked her, what was so bad, what was so painful in your life that disappearing from it felt like your only option? That's the question no one else had asked. Everyone was focused on the what she did, what a liar she was, what a manipulator she was. No one stopped to ask the fundamental question of why. Her parents immediately jumped in. Nothing was wrong, Dr. Phil. She has a good life. We gave her everything, and I believe they believed that. They provided a home, food, a car, tuition. They had checked all the boxes of what they thought good parenting was. But in their focus on the tangible, they had missed the intangible. They were providing for her, but were they seeing her? Were they hearing her? Jenna just sat there silent, looking down at her hands. The defiance was gone, replaced by a profound sadness. I could see the internal conflict raging inside her. Part of her wanted to scream her truth, and another part, the little girl who was told she was too sensitive, was telling her to shut up, that no one would listen anyway. It's a paralyzing state of being. You're drowning, and the people you expect to throw you a life raft are standing on the shore yelling at you for getting wet. Her fake disappearance wasn't a cry for attention in the way most people think. It wasn't about getting her name in the paper. It was a desperate, tragically misguided test. She was trying to create a situation so extreme, so undeniably serious, that her family would have no choice but to finally see her pain. She was trying to prove to them and to herself that she was worth worrying about. And in her mind, when they found out it was a hoax, their anger simply confirmed her deepest fear she wasn't. I let that silence hang in the air for a moment. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Let the weight of the question settle. Her parents were squirming, ready to jump in with another defense, another justification. I held up a hand not to them, but as a gentle signal to Jenna. I leaned forward slightly and softened my voice. Jenna, look at me. Not at them, not at the audience, just look at me. In your entire life, has there ever been a time where you felt truly 100% heard? That's when the dam broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic sob. It was a silent, gut-wrenching cascade of tears. The kind that comes from a place so deep and so wounded it doesn't even make a sound. She shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and in that one gesture, the entire backstory of this family started to unfold. It wasn't a story of abuse or neglect in the conventional sense. It was a story of 1,000 tiny cuts, a story of emotional starvation in a house full of food. I asked her to give me an example. Tell me about a time you tried to tell your parents you were hurting and you walked away feeling worse than when you started. She talked about being 16 and developing severe, debilitating panic attacks. She described the feeling, the racing heart, the conviction. She was dying, the terror. How did her parents respond, Mark? Ever the pragmatist told her to breathe through it and stop being so dramatic. Susan, ever the anxious peacekeeper, gave her a cup of chamomile tea and told her she was probably just stressed about a test. They took her to a doctor, of course. One time, he ran some basic tests, found nothing, and suggested it was anxiety. For Mark and Susan, that was the end of it. Case closed. It was just anxiety, a nuisance, a character flaw. They never asked her why she was anxious. They never validated the very real terror she was experiencing. They just wanted the symptom to go away because it was inconvenient. You see what's happening here? The child expresses a legitimate, terrifying internal experience. The parents, uncomfortable with emotions they can't see or fix, relabel it as an overreaction. The child learns a dangerous lesson. My reality is not real. My pain is a burden. To get love and approval, I must pretend I'm fine. But you can only suppress that for so long. The pressure builds. So the next time she had chronic stomach issues, pains that would double her over, they went through the motions again. They took her to specialists. When no physical cause could be found, the conclusion was the same. She was a hypochondriac. She was doing it for attention. On stage, Mark jumped in, his voice filled with righteous indignation. We spent thousands of dollars on doctors. We did everything. And I looked him right in the eye and said, Mark, you can drive a kid to every doctor in the country, but if you look at them while they're crying in pain and your expression says, I don't believe you, then you're not helping, you're harming. You're teaching her that her own body is lying to her. You're the parent. You're supposed to be her trusted anchor in reality. But you became the one who told her that her reality was wrong. This is a pattern I see all the time. Parents who confuse logistical support with emotional support. They think because they provide food, shelter, and money, they've done their job. But a child's soul can't be fed with a credit card. It's fed with empathy. It's fed with validation. It's fed by a parent who will sit with them in their darkness, not just flip a switch and tell them to cheer up. Susan was the more complicated piece of the puzzle. You could see the empathy in her eyes, but it was trapped behind a wall of fear. Fear of her husband's disapproval, fear of conflict. She would privately be softer with Jenna, but publicly in front of Mark, she would toe the family line. She became a silent co-conspirator in her daughter's emotional invalidation. For Jenna, that was perhaps the deeper betrayal. Her father's dismissal was overt, but her mother's was a quiet, constant abandonment. So let's trace the escalation. You start with panic attacks that are dismissed as drama. You move to physical pain that's dismissed as hypochondria. Each time she tries to communicate her distress in a socially acceptable way, she's shut down. Her emotional currency is worthless in this family. So what does she do? She has to up the stakes. Her brain, in a desperate last-ditch effort to be heard, starts looking for a problem so big, so undeniably real that no one could possibly dismiss it. A problem that can't be fixed with chamomile tea or a lecture on being tough. What is bigger than a missing child? What is more serious than a potential kidnapping or death? In her distorted, pain-fueled logic, this wasn't a lie, it was a translation. She was translating her invisible internal agony into a visible external crisis her parents could finally understand. She created a scenario where their worry would be mandatory. She thought, if I'm missing, they'll have to feel something. They'll have to believe that my absence causes pain. And if they feel pain when I'm gone, then maybe they'll finally realize I was in pain when I was here. It was a tragic, desperate gambit to force empathy from people who had proven themselves incapable of giving it freely. The air on the stage grew thick with unspoken resentments. Mark was doubling down, his face flushed with anger. So this is our fault. She terrifies us, lies to the police, and now we're the bad guys. That's ridiculous, Doctor. Phil. This is a classic defense mechanism. It's called blame shifting. When the truth of your own role in a dysfunctional system becomes too painful to acknowledge, you deflect. You make the other person the villain because it absolves you of any responsibility. He wasn't just defending himself. He was defending his entire worldview, a world where problems are simple and emotions are a weakness. I didn't let him off the hook. Mark, this isn't about finding a bad guy. There are no villains here. There are just three people in a world of hurt operating from playbooks that are broken. Your playbook says, fix the problem, ignore the feeling. Susan's playbook says, keep the peace at all cost. And Jenna's playbook, which she learned from the two of you, says, my authentic voice will be ignored, so I must scream in. A different language. The disappearance wasn't the start of the problem. It was the result of 1,000 conversations that didn't happen. It was the result of years of her trying to tell you she was hurting and you telling her in one way or another that she was wrong to feel that way. I turned to Susan. Susan, you're the heart of this family, but you've been afraid to let it beat. Tell me what you were really feeling during those 48 hours. Not the fear of the unknown, but what were you feeling about your relationship with your daughter? She hesitated, looking at Mark, a habit so deeply ingrained she probably didn't even realize she was doing it. I prompted her gently. It's okay. He can't fix this for you. Your voice matters here. Her composure finally crumbled. I was terrified we'd never see her again, she sobbed. But underneath it all, there was this horrible, nagging feeling that I'd missed something, that I hadn't been listening. I kept replaying conversations in my head, times when she seemed sad or distant, and I just told her to smile. I just wanted everything to be okay. I didn't want to rock the boat with Mark. That was the key. She wasn't a bad mother, she was a conflict-avoidant mother. In her effort to maintain a calm surface in the home, she sacrificed emotional authenticity. She taught Jenna that negative feelings were a threat to the family's stability. So Jenna learned to hide them to perform happiness until she couldn't anymore. The pressure cooker had to explode. The disappearance was the explosion. It was an act of extreme communication born from a lifetime of failed communication. Now we get to the confrontation. This is the part of the show that people often misunderstand. They see it as me attacking someone. It's not an attack, it's an intervention. It's about holding up a mirror so clean and so clear that the person can no longer ignore what they see. I looked straight at Jenna. The tears were gone now, replaced by a sullen defensiveness. It was time for her to take ownership of her part in this Empathy for her past doesn't excuse the destructive nature of her present actions. Jenna, I said my tone shifting from therapeutic to direct. We've established the why. I get it. I believe your pain is real. I believe you felt unheard and unseen. But what you did was incredibly destructive and manipulative. You didn't just hurt your parents, you lied to law enforcement, you wasted community resources, you terrified friends, you used a tool of chaos to get what you wanted. And let me tell you something, when you use manipulation to get a need met, even if you succeed, you will never trust the result. You'll always wonder if they're worried because they love you or because you created a crisis. Did you ever for 1 second stop to think about the real-world consequences of your actions on anyone other than yourself? She recoiled as if I'd struck her. I just wanted them to see what, Jenna? See that you're capable of profound selfishness. See that you're willing to emotionally terrorize them to make a point. Let me ask you this. What was your end game? Let's say it worked. They find you, they're relieved, and for 2 weeks they hug you and listen to you. Then what life goes on? The old patterns creep back in. Do you stage another disappearance in 6 months? Do you have to keep creating bigger and bigger dramas just to feel heard? That's not a life. It's a hostage situation, and you're making your family the hostages. This is the breakthrough moment I'm always looking for. It's when the why, the justification for the behavior, collides with the what, the actual objective reality of the behavior. She had been living so deeply in her own narrative of victimhood that she had blinded herself to the fact that she had also become a perpetrator. Her pain was real, but her solution was toxic. Your mother and father failed you in the emotional language department, I continued, but you have failed yourself by refusing to learn how to speak it. You're 22 years old. It's time to stop screaming for attention and start commanding respect. And you command respect by using your words, by saying, Dad, when you dismiss my feelings, it makes me feel worthless. By saying, Mom, when you don't stand up for me, it feels like a betrayal. By having the courage to speak your truth, even if it's inconvenient, even if they don't listen at first, you keep speaking it. What you did was the coward's way out. It was a shortcut through the hard work of building honest relationships. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't angry or tense. It was contemplative. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine insight in Jenna's eyes. The recognition that her pain, while valid, did not give her a license to inflict pain on others. For Mark and Susan, the mirror was just as harsh. They had to confront the reality that their good parenting had created a child so desperate she had to metaphorically set the house on fire just to get them to look up from their newspapers. That moment of raw, uncomfortable truth is where the real work begins. It's the pivot point. Everything before it is diagnosis, everything after is treatment. You can lead people to that pivot, but you can't force them to turn. They have to choose it. I watched the three of them sitting there, the architecture of their family dysfunction laid bare under the studio lights. The blame shifting had stopped. The defensiveness had cracked. What was left was the quiet, terrifying space of what now. I laid out a plan. This wasn't something that could be fixed in a single television episode. This was a deep, systemic problem that required a commitment to fundamental change. First, for Jenna, I said your number one job is to find your voice. Not your dramatic voice, not your crisis voice, but your calm, assertive, authentic voice. This means intensive individual therapy. You need to develop the tools to identify what you're feeling and express it clearly and directly without resorting to manipulation. You have to learn that your feelings are valid on their own. They don't need a catastrophe to justify them. You also need to make amends. Not a blanket, I'm sorry, but a real heartfelt apology to the people you hurt, acknowledging the specifics of the fear and chaos you caused. Ownership is the first step toward reclaiming your integrity. Then I turned to Mark and Susan. And for the two of you, your job is to learn how to listen, not just to the words, but to the music behind the words. This means family therapy. All three of you in a room with a professional who can help you dismantle these broken communication patterns and build new healthy ones. Mark, you have to learn that a feeling is not a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be acknowledged. When your daughter says, I'm scared, the right answer is not, don't be. The right answer is, tell me why. You have to trade your instinct to fix for an ability to feel. It's going to be uncomfortable for you. It's going to feel foreign, but the connection you'll build with your daughter will be worth it. I looked at Susan, and Susan, you have to find your courage. Your role as the family peacekeeper has come at the cost of truth. You have to be willing to sit in the discomfort of a disagreement. You have to be willing to say to Mark, honey, I think you're missing the point here, and to say to Jenna, I see that you're hurting and I'm here with you. Your silence has been a form of permission. It's time to start using your voice, not just for Jenna, but for yourself. You've been mediating your own feelings for years, and it's time to stop. The plan was clear. The path was laid out. We offered them the resources, the best therapists, a structured program to follow. This is the moment of truth for any family that comes on my stage. The cameras will turn off, the audience will go home, and they'll be left with a choice. Do they go back to the familiar misery they know, or do they embrace the terrifying, difficult work of building something new? The outcome with a family like this is never a neat little bow. It's not a Hollywood ending. Change, real change, is a messy, grinding, 2 steps forward, 1 step back process. We did follow-up calls with them over the next several months. At first, things were tense. The old habits died hard. Mark would slip back into his dismissive problem-solving mode. Jenna, unused to being heard, would sometimes overreact, mistaking any disagreement for the old invalidation. Susan would struggle to speak up, the fear of creating conflict, still a powerful force. There were blow-ups. There were setbacks. There was more than one call where their family therapist told my producer that they were on the verge of quitting. But then slowly something started to shift. It wasn't one big breakthrough, it was a series of small victories. Susan told me about a time Jenna called her upset about an issue with a friend. Susan's old instinct was to say, oh, it'll all blow over. But instead, she remembered our conversation. She took a breath and said, that sounds really painful. I'm so sorry you're going through that. Do you want to talk about it? Jenna was so taken aback, she was silent for a moment, and then she just started talking. For the first time, she felt like she had an ally, not a manager. Mark had his own turning point. He told me with a kind of grudging respect in his voice that he had gone to one of Jenna's art shows. She drew a lot of dark, emotional stuff, things he had previously dismissed as morbid, but he forced himself to really look, to try and see the world through her eyes. He didn't say he understood it all, but he went up to her afterwards, and instead of critiquing it or questioning it, he just said, there's a lot of power in that, Jenna. Thank you for sharing it with me. For her, hearing the word power from her father instead of drama was like rain after a decade of drought. Jenna, for her part, was doing the hard work. She was learning to sit with her own uncomfortable feelings without needing to create an external crisis. She started volunteering at an animal shelter, channeling her empathy into something productive. She was learning to self-soothe. She also wrote letters of apology, not just to her parents, but to the police detective who handled her case and to the friends who had spent 2 days searching the woods for her. It wasn't about seeking forgiveness. It was about taking responsibility. It was about her growing up. The fake disappearance was the act of a child. The recovery, the hard work, the apologies, those were the actions of an adult. She wasn't magically cured. The family wasn't suddenly perfect, but they had a new playbook. They were learning a new language. The disease, which was a fundamental inability to connect on an authentic emotional level, was finally in remission. The symptom, the desperate cry for help disguised as a hoax, was no longer necessary. They were learning to talk to each other, to see each other, and at the end of the day, that's all any of us really want. Years go by, and you don't always hear what happens to the guests. Life moves on. But Jenna's case stuck with me. It was a textbook example of how a family's emotional immune system can break down and start attacking itself. The presenting problem, the disappearance, was dramatic, but the real story was the quiet, chronic emotional neglect that preceded it. It's a story that plays out in millions of homes in less theatrical ways every single day. The child who acts out in school, the teenager who retreats into video games, the young adult who develops an eating disorder. These are all just different languages for the same core message. I am in pain and I don't know how to tell you in a way you will hear. About 3 years after the show, I got a letter. It was from Jenna. There was no return address on the envelope, just a postmark from a city I knew she'd moved to for college. I get a lot of mail, but this one felt different. It was handwritten on simple, plain paper. She wasn't writing as a former guest trying to get back on television. She was writing as a young woman who had found her footing. She told me that the first year was the hardest. She said there were times she wanted to run away for real, not as a stunt, but just to escape the sheer effort of it all. The effort of unlearning a lifetime of bad habits. The effort of trusting that her new voice would be enough. She wrote, I used to think my feelings were like a tornado. I had to let them build up into something destructive to prove they were real. The therapist you connected me with taught me that a feeling can just be a breeze. You can notice it, name it, and talk about it before it ever has to rip the roof off the house. That line hit me hard. She had finally understood the difference between expressing an emotion and being controlled by it. She talked about her parents. She said the relationship was still a work in progress, which is the most honest thing she could have said. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Mark, she wrote, would never be the kind of dad who wanted to have long, deep conversations about feelings, and she had learned to accept that. But he had learned to show his love and respect in his own way. He started sending her articles about artists he thought she might like. He built her a proper easel for her birthday. They were small gestures, but they were his language. It was him saying, I see you. I see what matters to you. For him, that was a monumental shift. Her relationship with her mother had become the true anchor in her life. Susan, having found her own voice in therapy, had become Jenna's biggest advocate. They talked on the phone several times a week, and not just about surface level stuff. They talked about their fears, their frustrations. Jenna wrote that her mom had apologized to her one day, a real tearful apology, not just for what happened around the disappearance, but for all the years she stood by silently while Jenna was emotionally drowning. She told me her biggest regret wasn't that I ran away, Jenna wrote, but that I felt I had to. And in that moment, I felt like the 16-year-old girl having a panic attack was finally being held and told it was going to be okay. That's healing. That is generational change happening in a single conversation. The most important part of the letter, though, was about her. She wasn't defined by her past, but she wasn't running from it either. She had finished her degree in fine arts and was working at a small gallery. She had a circle of friends who knew her for who she was, not for the sensational headline that had once defined her. She had a boyfriend, and she told me about their first big fight. Her old instinct, she said, would have been to either shut down completely or create some kind of drama to test his affection. Instead, she sat him down and said, when you said that, it made me feel invisible, and I need to tell you why that's a big deal for me. She walked him through it. He listened. They worked it out. It was a simple, healthy adult resolution to a conflict. For her, it was a miracle. It was proof that she had broken the cycle. She ended the letter by saying, I used to believe I had to disappear to be seen. You and your team showed me that the only way to be truly seen is to have the courage to show up authentically and consistently in your own life. I'm not faking anything anymore. This is the outcome you hope for. It's not about ratings or dramatic television moments. It's about being a catalyst. You provide a platform, you hold up the mirror, you offer the tools, and then you step back and trust that people, when confronted with their own truth, will find the courage to do the right thing. Jenna's story wasn't about a liar who faked a disappearance. It was about a girl who was so invalidated that she had to scream for help in the only way she knew how, and her family, once they were forced to listen, found the grace to learn a new way to love. It's a powerful reminder that behind every crazy behavior, behind every headline that makes you shake your head and judge, there is a story, there is a why, there is pain. And if you're willing to dig past the symptom and find the disease, if you're willing to listen to the silent sickness instead of just reacting to the fever, that's where you find the opportunity for real healing. Jenna and her family found it. They walked through the fire and came out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. And their story serves as a lesson for every parent and every child. Your voice matters, but you have to have the courage to use it, and others have to have the compassion to hear it.